You will find, Mr. Miller, that I always get what I want. That little dirt patch of yours is an eyesore and a liability, and it will belong to this community. Those were the words that started the war. The words that turned my quiet inheritance into a battlefield. Funny how a person can live 45 years seeking nothing but a peaceful equilibrium, only to have it all threatened by one woman with a bad haircut and a surplus of self-importance. If you're listening to this, maybe you've had a Brenda in your life, too. Let me know in the comments where you're from and if you've ever had to deal with a neighbor who thought their opinion was law. And if you want to hear more stories about bullies getting exactly what they deserve, maybe hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to hear how this ends. It all began with my father's passing. He wasn't a complicated man. He loved two things above all else, my mother and the sky. After Mom died, he poured all his energy into the latter. He was a structural engineer, a man who understood stress and load, tension and compression. He spent his life making sure buildings didn't fall down. In his spare time, he built something that went up. The property was his masterpiece. 40 acres of rolling North Carolina hills, with a small, comfortable house he built with his own 2 hands, a workshop that smelled perpetually of sawdust and welding flux, and the crown jewel, a 2,000-foot grass airstrip, flatter and more perfectly graded than any county road. For 30 years, he'd flown his little Cessna 172 off that strip, a speck of silver against the vast blue canvas. It was his church, his sanctuary, his connection to my mother's memory. When he died, he left it all to me. I'm an engineer, too. I work with concrete, not steel like him, but the principles are the same. I understand foundations. I understand how things are built, and I understand how they can be brought down. I was recently divorced, living in a sterile condo that felt more like a holding cell than a home. The idea of moving back to the quiet solitude of my father's land felt like coming up for air after being held underwater. I wanted to fix up the house, fly the Cessna he'd left me, and listen to the sound of the wind, not the sound of my upstairs neighbors arguing. I wanted peace. The problem arrived in the form of a beige minivan. The property abutted a newer development called Whispering Pines Estates. It was one of those places where every house was a slightly different shade of taupe, and the trees they were named after had all been bulldozed to make room for them. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, was notoriously aggressive. My father had mentioned them, calling them the beige police, but he'd mostly just ignored them, and they'd left him alone, an old man on an old piece of land they couldn't touch. I had been on the property for less than a week when the minivan pulled up my long gravel driveway. A woman in her mid-50s, wearing crisp white capri pants and a polo shirt with a pine tree logo embroidered on it, marched to my front door. Her face was a mask of strained pleasantness, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes and looks more like a warning. "Mr. Miller," she said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "That's me," I replied, wiping grease from my hands with a rag. I'd been working on the Cessna's engine. "I'm Brenda from, president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association." She extended a hand, but her grip was less a handshake and more a brief assertion of dominance. "I wanted to personally welcome you to the neighborhood." "Thanks, but I'm not really in the neighborhood," I said, gesturing to the acres around us. "I'm sort of the neighborhood's quiet, country uncle." Her smile tightened, cracking at the edges like poorly cured concrete. "Yes, about that. We need to discuss the usage of the communal access path." I blinked. "Communal access path?" She pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward the airstrip. "That long, unsightly dirt patch you have running through your property. It's technically HOA common ground, and your father's activities were grandfathered in under a temporary variance. A variance that expired upon his death." I felt a laugh bubble up, but I suppressed it. She was serious. This wasn't a joke. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that isn't a dirt path. It's an airstrip. And it's not communal ground. It's the centerpiece of my private property. I have the deed and the property survey from 1978 to prove it." Brenda from looked at me with a condescending pity, as if I were a child who didn't understand how the world worked. "Deeds can be amended. Property lines can be reevaluated for the good of the community. The noise from that contraption is a violation of our covenants, and the path itself is an eyesore. We'll be sending you official notice. We intend to pave it and turn it into a walking trail for the residents." I just stared at her. My father's legacy. His sanctuary. A walking trail. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it was breathtaking. It was like someone telling you they plan to turn your living room into a public bathroom. "That's not going to happen," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We'll see," she chirped, turning on her heel and marching back to her beige minivan. That was the first shot fired. I was annoyed, but I figured it was just a misunderstanding. A simple case of an overzealous HOA president who hadn't done her homework. I thought a letter from my lawyer with a copy of the deed would be the end of it. I was wrong. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a war I never wanted to fight, against an enemy who had no idea what kind of structure she was trying to demolish. She thought she was dealing with a simple farmhouse. She was about to find out it was a fortress. The first official letter arrived a week later. It was printed on thick, cream-colored paper with the Whispering Pines logo embossed in gold. It looked important, but the contents were pure fantasy. It cited bylaws I wasn't subject to, claimed jurisdiction it didn't have, and levied a $500 fine for unauthorized use of community property. It also demanded I remove the inoperable vehicle, my father's perfectly maintained Cessna, within 7 days, or it would be towed at my expense. I laughed. I actually sat on my porch steps, holding this ridiculous piece of paper, and laughed until tears streamed down my face. Towed. A plane. Where did she think they were going to tow it? The local impound lot next to the abandoned pickup trucks. My response was simple and professional. I had my lawyer draft a polite but firm letter. It explained, in very small words, the concept of private property. It included a certified copy of the deed, a satellite image with the property lines clearly marked, and a gentle reminder that their HOA covenants had as much legal bearing on my land as the rules of monopoly. We sent it via certified mail. I thought that would be the end of it. A clear, legal boundary had been drawn. Any sane person would see the facts, huff in frustration, and move on to harassing some poor resident about the color of their mailbox. But Brenda was not a sane person. She was a tyrant in command of a tiny, beige kingdom, and she did not tolerate dissent. Her response to facts and logic was to escalate. Drastically. The fines started arriving weekly. The reasons became more and more absurd. Noise pollution, for starting the Cessna's engine. Environmental contamination, for refueling the plane from my own licensed fuel tank. My personal favorite was a fine for unapproved landscaping because the grass on the airstrip was, and I quote, not consistent with the community's aesthetic standards. I ignored them. They were legal fictions, meaningless pieces of paper. But then she started a campaign of public shaming. On the Whispering Pines community Facebook page, a private group I obviously wasn't a part of, she began posting. A friend of mine who lived in the development sent me screenshots. Brenda wrote about the uncooperative and hostile new resident on the border of their pristine community. She painted me as a rich, arrogant recluse who cared nothing for their property values or their children's safety. She implied the airstrip was a danger, that I was a reckless amateur who could crash into their homes at any moment. People, fearful and ignorant about aviation, ate it up. The comments were a cesspool of paranoia. What if he hits a school bus? I heard those small planes are always crashing. Why does one man need his own airport anyway? It's suspicious. The harassment became more direct. Cars would slow down as they passed my driveway, the occupants glaring at my house. Someone threw a bag of trash onto my lawn. One morning I woke up to find a large, crudely painted sign hammered into the ground at the end of my driveway. It read, "No trespassing, property of Whispering Pines HOA." I took the sign down, broke it over my knee, and tossed it in my burn pile. This was no longer a simple dispute. This was a siege. Brenda was turning an entire community against me based on lies and fear. She was trying to force me out, to make my life so miserable that I would sell my father's land, probably to the developer she was undoubtedly in league with. But every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That's a law of physics. It's also a law of human nature. Brenda was applying pressure, trying to find my breaking point. She was about to discover that the materials she was dealing with were far stronger than she imagined. An engineer doesn't see pressure as a threat. We see it as a variable to be calculated, managed, and, if necessary, redirected back at its source. The turning point, the moment my patient, methodical approach cracked, came on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. The sky was clear, the wind was calm, a perfect day for flying. I'd spent the morning doing pre-flight checks on the Cessna, thinking of my dad, feeling that familiar mix of grief and peace that came with being in his workshop. I needed to get up in the air. I needed that perspective, that feeling of leaving the world and its petty squabbles behind. I did my takeoff, a smooth, clean lift into the blue. I flew for about an hour, circling the lakes to the north, watching the world shrink below me. From 5,000 feet, you can't see property lines or HOA covenants. You just see the beautiful, sprawling tapestry of the earth. It was calming. It was what I needed. When I circled back for my approach, my heart sank into my stomach. Down on my airstrip, my private property, was a gathering. It looked like a bizarre, suburban tailgate party. There were at least a dozen cars, minivans and SUVs, parked directly across the runway. People were sitting in lawn chairs, coolers at their sides. Kids were running around, throwing frisbees. They had set up a blockade. I keyed the radio. Whispering Pines traffic, this is Cessna November 521 Papa on final approach for runway 18, Miller Private Strip. I repeated the call, hoping the sight of an actual airplane about to land would scatter them. Nothing. They looked up, pointed, and stayed right where they were. Some of them even waved, a mocking, insolent gesture. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This wasn't trash on my lawn or nasty posts on Facebook. This was dangerous. This was reckless endangerment. They were intentionally obstructing an active runway. My only option was to execute a go-around, push the throttle forward, and climb away, my fuel getting lower and my anger reaching a critical boiling point. I had to divert to the nearest municipal airport, 10 miles away. I landed, my hands shaking with adrenaline and fury. I had to pay a landing fee and arrange for a taxi to get back to my own home. As the taxi pulled up my driveway, I saw the party was breaking up. They were laughing, packing up their coolers, congratulating each other. Brenda was there, holding court like a conquering general. She saw me get out of the taxi and smirked. "Having trouble, Mr. Miller," she called out, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "Maybe you should find a more appropriate place to park your toy." That was it. The moment the switch flipped. The engineer in my head, the one who always preached patience, data collection, and rational responses, was silenced. In his place was a cold, quiet voice. It didn't shout. It calculated. It told me that a defensive strategy was no longer sufficient. The structural integrity of my piece had been compromised. It was time to stop patching the cracks and go after the source of the seismic event. It was time to demolish Brenda's entire world. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my father's old leather armchair with a glass of whiskey and a legal pad. My initial phase of dealing with this was over. Phase 1, reasonable response, had been a catastrophic failure. Phase 2, strategic retaliation, was now in effect. I wasn't just going to defend myself anymore. I was going on the attack. My first call was to an old friend, Walt Peterson. Walt had spent 35 years as an inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration. He was retired now, spending his days fishing and complaining about the government he used to work for. But there was nothing about aviation regulations he didn't know. He was a walking, talking encyclopedia of the FAR/AIM. I laid out the whole situation for him, from the first letter to the blockade on the runway. He was silent for a long time on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was gravelly and cold. "What they did," he said slowly, "wasn't just stupid, son. It was a federal crime. Section 32 of Title 18 of the United States Code. Interference with the authorized operation of an aircraft. That carries a penalty of up to 20 years in prison." A grim smile touched my lips. I thought so. But proving it's an authorized operation to a bunch of local cops can be tricky with a private strip, he continued. "We need to find something that gives it teeth. Something undeniable. Your dad built that strip in the late 70s, right?" 78, I confirmed. "Good," Walt said. "That was a different era. People were more community-minded, even the feds. I have a hunch. Let me make some calls, dig into the archives. Your dad was a smart man. I doubt he just plowed a field and called it an airport without covering all his bases. While Walt went digging, I started my own investigation. I became a master of public records. I spent hours at the county courthouse, poring over property deeds, zoning ordinances, and development plans for Whispering Pines. I read their HOA bylaws cover to cover, a document so filled with petty tyrannies it made my skin crawl. And then I found it. A small notation in the original development plan for Whispering Pines, an easement agreement my father had signed with the original developer. It granted the development access to a water main that ran along the edge of his property. In exchange, the developer, and by extension the future HOA, formally acknowledged the existence and perpetual right of operation for his private airstrip. It was right there, in black and white, filed with the county. Brenda's entire legal claim was built on a foundation of sand. She either hadn't bothered to look, or she knew and didn't care. I was betting on the latter. But the real bombshell came from Walt a few days later. He called me, his voice buzzing with excitement. I found it. I knew it. Your old man was a sly genius. What did you find, Walt? It's not just a private airstrip, kid. Back in 1982, after that big airliner crash in D.C., the FAA started a program to identify and register small, private fields as emergency landing zones. They wanted a network of places for planes in distress to put down safely. Your dad registered the strip. It's on the books, filed away and forgotten for 40 years. Miller Airstrip is an officially designated emergency landing zone with the FAA and the State Department of Transportation. I sat down heavily in my chair. The implications were enormous. This wasn't just my private property anymore. In a way, it was a piece of federal infrastructure. What does that mean, exactly? I asked. It means, Walt said, his voice laced with triumphant glee, that anyone who willfully obstructs that runway isn't just messing with you. They're interfering with national airspace infrastructure. They're not just giving you a headache, they're committing a serious, unambiguous federal offense. We have her. We have her cold. A cold, satisfying calm washed over me. The anger was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of a well-oiled machine kicking into gear. I had the facts. I had the law. I had the engineering mindset to build a case so solid, so perfectly constructed, that when I was ready, Brenda Frum's world would collapse into its own footprint. My plan, which I mentally dubbed Project Turbulence, was taking shape. It would be a multi-phase operation. Phase 1 was complete, information gathering. Phase 2, setting the trap, was about to begin. I wasn't an idiot. I knew that having the law on my side was one thing, proving a violation was another. Her word against mine. I needed irrefutable proof. I needed her to incriminate herself. And I knew, based on her personality, that she would walk right into any trap I set, as long as it was baited with her own arrogance. My profession is all about anticipating stress points and building redundancies. I applied the same logic here. I went online and ordered 4 high-resolution, weatherproof security cameras with night vision and cloud storage. I spent a weekend mounting them strategically. One was hidden in a birdhouse overlooking the entrance to the airstrip. Another was disguised as a part of the fence post, giving a clear shot down the entire length of the runway. The third I mounted high on my workshop, and the fourth on the house itself. I had 360-degree coverage of the area in question. Any vehicle, any person, any action would be recorded in crystal-clear high definition. Next, I prepared the bait. I drafted a new letter. This one wasn't from a lawyer. It was from me. It was calm, professional, and absolutely devastating. I laid out the facts, one by one. I included a copy of the easement agreement from the county records. And then, the killing blow. I included a copy of the FAA and state DOT registration, clearly identifying the airstrip as a designated emergency landing zone. The letter concluded with a simple, non-threatening paragraph: please be advised that any future attempts to obstruct the runway, for any reason, will be considered a willful violation of Title 18, Section 32 of the U.S. Code, as well as several state-level statutes. All such incidents will be documented and reported to the appropriate federal and state law enforcement agencies. I consider this matter closed and trust that the HOA will respect my private property rights and the federal designation of this facility going forward. I sent a copy via certified mail, return receipt requested, to every single member of the HOA board, addressed to them by name at their home addresses. I wanted to make sure they all saw it. I wanted them to know what Brenda was asking them to do. I wanted to give them a chance to jump off the ship before it hit the iceberg. Then, I waited. I knew Brenda. Her ego was a fragile, brittle thing. My letter wasn't just a legal notice, it was a direct challenge to her authority. It told her, and her entire board, that she was wrong. She could not, would not, let that stand. She would have to retaliate. She would have to prove she was still in charge. I was counting on it. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days after the receipts came back, confirming they had all received the letter, the Whispering Pines Facebook page exploded. My friend sent me a stream of screenshots. Brenda had posted a frantic, multi-paragraph screed. "Urgent community alert," it began. "The hostile resident, Mr. Miller, is now resorting to threats and forged documents to intimidate your HOA board. He is claiming his illegal dirt path is some kind of federal airport to scare us into submission. This is a desperate tactic and a lie. We will not be bullied. We will stand together and reclaim our community land. There will be a community cleanup and picnic this Saturday to beautify our walking trail. All residents are encouraged to attend and show solidarity." It was perfect. Better than I could have hoped. She called my bluff. She doubled down. She called the documents forged, which was libel. And she was organizing another blockade, this time under the guise of a community picnic. She was going to serve up her own indictment on a silver platter, with potato salad on the side. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I checked my cameras, tested the remote access on my phone, and made sure the audio recording was crisp and clear. I called Walt and gave him the time and date. He promised to have the regional FAA office's duty officer on standby. I also placed a call to the non-emergency line of the county sheriff's office. I explained the situation calmly, told them about the ongoing harassment and the planned trespassing event, and gave them the FAA registration number. The dispatcher sounded skeptical at first, but after I mentioned the federal designation, her tone changed. She promised to have a patrol car in the area. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. The trap was set. The cameras were rolling. All I had to do was wait for the guest of honor to arrive. Around 10 in the morning, they started to arrive. It was a repeat of the last time, but bigger. More cars, more people. Brenda was there, of course, directing traffic with grandiose waves of her arms. She pointed to specific spots on my runway, instructing people where to park their cars to create the most effective barrier. "That's it, Margaret, right in the middle. We want to make a statement." I heard her shout, her voice picked up clearly by the camera on the workshop. They unloaded grills, coolers, and lawn chairs. They spread out blankets on the very ground my father had so meticulously graded and cared for. They were treating my runway, a federally designated piece of aviation infrastructure, like a public park. And it was all being recorded. Every car that drove onto the grass, every smug smile, every defiant cheer as Brenda gave a little speech about community rights and fighting bullies. I sat in my office, watching the live feeds on my monitor. A part of me was still furious, but it was a cold, controlled fury. It was the detached focus of an engineer watching a stress test, waiting for the calculated failure to occur. They were digging their own grave, deeper and deeper with every folding chair they opened. I let them get comfortable. I let them get their grill going and pop open their first beers. I wanted them to be fully committed, to have no doubt in their minds that they were in the right and had won the day. Then, I picked up the phone. My first call was to the sheriff's office. "This is Mark Miller at 1250 Old Mill Road. I'm calling to report the trespassing event I spoke with you about. There are approximately 30 individuals and 15 vehicles currently trespassing on my property and obstructing a federally designated landing zone." My second call was to Walt. "It's showtime," I said. Less than 10 minutes later, a county sheriff's cruiser came bumping up my driveway. The deputy, a young guy with a serious expression, got out of his car and surveyed the scene. The partygoers fell silent, looking at him with a mixture of surprise and annoyance. Brenda immediately marched over to him, her hands on her hips. "Can I help you, officer? This is a private community event." "Ma'am, I'm responding to a trespassing call," the deputy said, his eyes scanning the cars parked on the airstrip. "This is private property. You're all going to have to leave. This is HOA common land." Brenda shrieked, her voice rising. "We have every right to be here. This man," she said, pointing a trembling finger at my house, "is harassing us." The deputy looked tired. He'd clearly dealt with this kind of thing before. "Ma'am, I've seen the property lines. This land belongs to Mr. Miller. You are trespassing." Just as the argument was escalating, a second vehicle arrived. This one was a dark sedan with government plates. A man in a suit and tie got out. He had the unmistakable air of a federal official, all business, no nonsense. He walked straight past the deputy and confronted Brenda. "Brenda from?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the murmuring crowd like a surgeon's scalpel. "Yes," she said, looking flustered. "My name is David Chen. I'm the Chief Safety Inspector for this region's Federal Aviation Administration Office," he said, flashing his credentials. "I'm here to find out why you are leading an effort to deliberately obstruct a registered emergency landing zone." The color drained from Brenda's face. The words, Federal Aviation Administration, had a chilling effect on the entire crowd. The festive atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a thick, anxious silence. This is just a dirt path," she stammered. "It's not a real airport." Mr. Chen did not look amused. "Ma'am, this dirt path is listed on federal aviation charts as a safe harbor for aircraft in distress. By parking these vehicles here, you are not only trespassing, you are creating a deadly hazard. Had a plane needed to land here in an emergency today, you would be responsible for a potential catastrophe." He turned to the crowd. "For your information," he announced, his voice now booming with authority, "you are all in violation of Title 18, Section 32 of the United States Code. Willful interference with an aviation facility. I suggest you remove yourselves and your vehicles from this runway immediately. The sheriff's deputy here will be taking down the names and license plates of every person present." Panic erupted. People scrambled for their car keys, tripping over coolers and folding chairs in their haste to flee. The smug defiance was gone, replaced by wide-eyed fear. They weren't brave community activists anymore, they were accomplices in a federal crime. Brenda stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. She watched her army desert her. She watched her power crumble in the face of a man with a badge and a binder full of regulations. "You can't do this," she screamed at Chen. "This is a lie. He paid you, didn't he? This is all a conspiracy." Mr. Chen just looked at her with cold pity. "Ma'am, my only conspiracy is with aviation safety. You've been warned. The FAA will be opening a formal investigation into this incident and the actions of your homeowners association." He turned to the deputy. "Officer, please ensure you get everyone's information. My office will be in touch." He gave me a curt nod from across the lawn, got back in his sedan, and drove away, leaving a mushroom cloud of chaos in his wake. Brenda was apoplectic. She stood amidst the fleeing crowd, screaming threats and accusations. She screamed at the deputy, she screamed at her neighbors who were now avoiding her gaze, and she screamed at my house. "You think you've won, Miller? This isn't over. I will destroy you. I will bury you in lawyers and fines. You will regret the day you ever crossed me." I watched it all from my window, a grim satisfaction settling in my gut. This was a major victory. Her credibility was shattered. Her followers were terrified. She had been publicly humiliated and put on notice by the federal government. But I knew it wasn't the end. A cornered animal is the most dangerous. Her public humiliation wouldn't make her reasonable, it would make her vicious. She had lost the battle of the airstrip, so now she would make the war personal. I knew the next phase would be ugly. I just didn't realize how ugly. The fallout from what the community started calling the picnic incident was immediate. The HOA's Facebook page, once a bastion of anti-Miller sentiment, went quiet. The weekly fines stopped coming. A palpable sense of fear had replaced the self-righteous anger. But Brenda was not one to retreat. She was regrouping. Her retaliation, when it came, was far more insidious than I had anticipated. She couldn't attack my property anymore, so she attacked my character. She began a smear campaign that made her previous efforts look like child's play. She couldn't use the official HOA channels, so she resorted to anonymous letters and whisper campaigns. A letter, typed and signed, was circulated throughout Whispering Pines. It suggested that the real reason I wanted a private airstrip was for illegal activities. It hinted at drug running, at clandestine nighttime flights. It was pure, unsubstantiated slander, but it was designed to plant a seed of doubt and fear. Then, she escalated it beyond the neighborhood. She filed an anonymous tip with the Drug Enforcement Administration. One afternoon, 2 DEA agents showed up at my door. They were professional, but their questions were pointed. They wanted to know about my flight patterns, the purpose of my trips, the nature of my cargo. I was stunned, but I kept my cool. I invited them in, offered them coffee, and answered every question truthfully. I showed them my pilot's logbook, my maintenance records for the Cessna, everything. I explained the situation with the HOA and their president, Brenda From. I could see the agent sizing me up, and after an hour, they seemed to realize it was a bogus tip. They apologized for the intrusion and left, but the experience left me shaken. She had brought federal drug agents to my door based on a complete fabrication. This was a new level of insanity. The final straw, the act that crossed a line from which there was no return, was when she tried to get me fired. She somehow found out where I worked, a large civil engineering firm in the city. She wrote a letter to the CEO of my company. It was a masterpiece of malicious fiction. She painted me as an unstable, aggressive individual embroiled in serious legal disputes with my entire community. She accused me of being a public menace and implied that my erratic behavior made me a liability as an engineer responsible for public safety. My boss, a good man named Frank, called me into his office. He had the letter on his desk. He looked concerned. "Mark," he said, "I know this is garbage. But HR has to investigate. You know how it is. What the hell is going on?" I spent 2 hours explaining everything from the beginning. Frank listened patiently. To his credit, he believed me completely, but he explained that the company had to perform its due diligence. It was a nightmare. I was being investigated at work because of a feud over a strip of grass. She was no longer just attacking my peace and quiet, she was attacking my livelihood, my professional reputation. That night, I knew Project Turbulence had to enter its final, decisive phase. She had escalated to a point where simply defending myself was not enough. She needed to be removed. Permanently. And I had a suspicion that her obsession with my land wasn't just about power. It was about money. People like Brenda don't go to these lengths for ego alone. There was something else at play. I just needed to find it. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source. An email appeared in my inbox one evening from an anonymous, encrypted address. The message was short. "I know what Brenda is really up to. She's a thief. I can prove it. If you want to talk, be at the diner on Highway 54 tomorrow at 8 p.m. Come alone." I was wary. It could be a trap. But my gut told me it was genuine. Someone on the inside had finally had enough. The next night, I walked into the diner. It was a classic old place with red vinyl booths and a jukebox. I scanned the room and saw a man sitting alone in a corner booth, nervously stirring a cup of coffee. He looked to be in his late 50s, with a defeated slump to his shoulders and weary, haunted eyes. As I got closer, I recognized him. It was Gary From. Brenda's husband. He flinched when he saw me, like a dog expecting to be kicked. "Mr. Miller," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "Thanks for coming." I slid into the booth opposite him. "Gary. I have to admit, you're the last person I expected to see." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Yeah, well. I'm the last person she'd expect, too. I can't do it anymore," he said, his voice cracking. "I can't live with what she's doing, what she's become. This thing with you. It's just the tip of the iceberg." For the next hour, he laid it all out. It was even worse than I had imagined. Brenda hadn't just been a power-hungry HOA president. She had been systematically embezzling from the HOA for years. Small amounts at first, padding invoices from landscapers, creating phantom maintenance fees. But it had grown. The reason she was so obsessed with my land, he explained, was simple greed. She had a deal with a local developer. If the HOA could acquire my land, they would rezone the Airstrip portion and sell it to this developer for a fraction of its market value. The developer would then build a new section of high-density condos. Brenda's cut, a secret kickback paid in cash, was supposed to be $250,000. It was supposed to be our retirement, Gary whispered, staring into his coffee cup. She kept saying it was for us. But it was for her. It's always for her. He had the proof. He had been secretly making copies of everything for the past year. Bank statements showing transfers to her personal accounts. Emails between her and the developer, discussing the kickback scheme in thinly veiled code. Copies of the fraudulent invoices. It was a complete, devastating portrait of a common crook. He pushed a thick manila envelope across the table. "This is everything," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were filled with a profound sadness. "You do what you have to do. I just want it to be over." I took the envelope. It felt heavy, not just with paper, but with the weight of a man's broken life. "Why are you doing this, Gary?" I asked quietly. "Because she tried to get you fired," he said, his voice thick with shame. "And because last week, our son called. He's a good kid, a freshman in college. She told him all about you, how you were this evil man trying to destroy our community. And he believed her. He told me he was proud of her for standing up to you." I looked at my son, and I realized I was helping his mother turn him into a person who celebrates cruelty. I couldn't be a part of that anymore. I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat. I now had the final piece of the puzzle. This wasn't just about harassment or property disputes anymore. This was about felony fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. This was big league. It was time to stop calling the sheriff and start calling the attorney general. With Gary's evidence in hand, everything changed. I was no longer just a private citizen defending his property. I was a material witness to a significant white-collar crime. I spent the next 2 days scanning every document, organizing them into a clear, chronological narrative. I cross-referenced the emails with the bank statements, creating an undeniable timeline of the conspiracy. My engineering background was invaluable. I was essentially building a case instead of a bridge, ensuring every connection was sound and every load path led directly back to Brenda. I contacted a lawyer I knew who specialized in financial crimes. He looked over the evidence, his eyes getting wider with every page. "Mark," he said when he was done, "this is an open and shut case. This isn't just an HOA dispute. This is the kind of stuff that gets you a feature in the state penitentiary's newsletter." He made the call. We bypassed local authorities, who might get tangled in small-town politics, and went straight to the state attorney general's office, specifically their economic crimes unit. We sent them the entire package of evidence, along with my sworn affidavit and a statement from Gary, who had agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for consideration. The gears of justice turned slowly, but with evidence this clean, they turn with certainty. An investigator from the AG's office contacted me a week later. They were opening a full investigation. He asked me to keep quiet and act as if nothing had changed. They wanted to build their case and choose the perfect moment to act. And as fate would have it, Brenda provided them with that moment on a silver platter. Feeling victorious after the DEA visit and my troubles at work, Brenda got cocky. She called a special, emergency meeting of the entire Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. The stated purpose, according to the notice she sent out, was to vote on a massive, special assessment fee. The money, she claimed, was needed for a legal defense and land acquisition fund to finally resolve the Miller property issue and reclaim our communal walking trail. She was going to ask her neighbors to pay thousands of dollars each to fund her legal battle against me and, ultimately, to fund the very land grab that would net her a secret $250,000 payday. The sheer audacity was stunning. It was the perfect stage for her downfall. I informed the AG's investigator of the meeting. He was ecstatic. "It's perfect," he said. "Let her dig the hole. We'll be there to help her fill it in." The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. The air was thick with tension and self-righteous anger, all of it directed at me. I saw neighbors who had once been friendly now glaring at me with open hostility. Brenda had done her job well. I arrived a few minutes late, by design. I walked in with my lawyer at my side. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to me. Brenda was at a podium at the front of the room, a smug, triumphant look on her face. "Well, well," she said into the microphone, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look who decided to show up. Come to see democracy in action, Mr. Miller. Or did you just want a front row seat to watch your little kingdom crumble?" A few of her cronies laughed and applauded. "Something like that, Brenda," I said calmly, walking toward the front. "You have no right to be here," she snapped. "This is a private meeting for homeowners." "Actually," my lawyer interjected, his voice calm and authoritative, "since the primary topic on the agenda is Mr. Miller and his property, he has every right to be here to address the assembly. It's in your own bylaws. Section 9, subsection C." Brenda's face flushed with anger. She had been beaten with her own rulebook. She sputtered for a moment, then waved a dismissive hand. "Fine. Sit. It won't matter. The vote is a formality." She then launched into her speech. It was a 20-minute diatribe filled with lies, half-truths, and dramatic appeals to community spirit. She painted me as a monster, a threat to their children, their safety, and their property values. She held up my certified letter about the FAA designation. "He's even created these forged federal documents to try and scare us," she proclaimed, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. When she finished, she presented the special assessment. It was $10,000 per household. The room gasped. That was a serious amount of money. But she had whipped them into such a frenzy that people were actually nodding, ready to pay it. "All in favor of the special assessment to fund our fight for our community," she cried, raising her fist in the air. Before anyone could respond, I stood up. "Before you vote," I said, my voice steady and clear, "there's a few things you all deserve to know. You are out of order." Brenda shrieked. "Let him speak," someone from the back shouted. The exorbitant fee had clearly made some people pause. I walked to the podium. I didn't have notes. I didn't need them. I had the truth. "For the last 3 months," I began, "Brenda has been telling you that I am your enemy. She has told you that I am trying to endanger your children and lower your property values. She has told you that I am illegally occupying your land." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Tonight, I'm here to tell you that every single one of those things is a lie." I started with the basics. I projected the county property survey onto the screen behind the podium. This is my property. The line is clear. It has never been community land. Next, I projected the easement agreement. This is the agreement your own development signed, acknowledging my father's right to his airstrip forever. Then came the FAA registration. This isn't a forgery, Brenda. This is a public record. Our airstrip is, and has been for 40 years, a federally protected emergency landing zone. When you blockaded it, you weren't just trespassing. You were committing a serious federal crime, and you encouraged your neighbors to do the same. The mood in the room was shifting. The angry certainty was being replaced by a dawning, horrified unease. People were looking at each other, then at Brenda, whose face had gone pale. "But that's not the real reason we're here," I continued, my voice dropping. "You're not here to vote on a legal fund. You're here to vote on a slush fund." I projected an email. It was between Brenda and the developer. Brenda doesn't want my land for a walking trail. She wants it because she has a secret deal to sell it to a developer for a kickback. A $250,000 kickback, to be exact. The room erupted in gasps and angry murmurs. "And where has all your money been going?" I went on, clicking through slides. Bank statements. Padded invoices from the landscaper, her brother-in-law. Payments to a consulting firm that was nothing more than a shell corporation owned by Brenda herself. She hasn't just been lying to you. She's been stealing from you. 4 years. Brenda completely snapped. Her carefully constructed facade of a concerned community leader shattered into a million pieces. Lies. "It's all lies," she screamed, her voice a raw, animalistic shriek. She lunged toward me, trying to grab the laptop. He's the criminal. He's the one who should be in jail. That land was supposed to be our retirement, Gary, you idiot. You gave it all away. She had just confessed. In her rage, she had admitted to the whole room that the land deal was for her personal enrichment. And at that exact moment, two men in suits who had been standing quietly at the back of the room began to walk forward. Brenda from, one of them said, his voice calm but unyielding as he flashed a badge. You are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The entire room fell into a dead, shocked silence. The only sound was Brenda's ragged breathing as she stared at the badge, then at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and pure, unadulterated shock. She had never, in her wildest dreams, imagined it would end like this. She thought she was untouchable. As the second officer put her hands behind her back and the cold, metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the silent room, she finally found her voice. Her eyes locked on mine, burning with a pathetic, impotent rage. You'll regret this, Miller, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. You haven't won. I'll own you. I'll sue you into the ground. It was the last, desperate threat of a queen whose castle had just been reduced to rubble around her. It was hollow. We both knew it. She had nothing left. No power, no credibility, no money, and now, no freedom. She was just a common criminal, exposed and defeated. They led her out of the clubhouse, a stunned and silent crowd parting before them like the Red Sea. The war was over. I had won. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Brenda From's case was a slam dunk for the state. With Gary's testimony and the mountain of evidence, she was convicted on all counts. She was sentenced to 8 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, a sum that bankrupted her completely. The developer she was in league with was also indicted, his business ruined. Poetic justice, I suppose. The Whispering Pines community was thrown into chaos, but it was a cleansing fire. The entire HOA board resigned in disgrace. A new board was elected, composed of reasonable people who were horrified by what Brenda had done in their name. Their first official act was to draft a formal, written apology to me, which was delivered by the new president, a retired schoolteacher who seemed mortified by the whole affair. They also voted to officially recognize my property rights and the Airstrip's designation in the community's governing documents, ensuring this could never happen again. The community itself began to heal. The anger and suspicion that Brenda had fostered slowly dissipated, replaced by a sheepish sense of embarrassment. A few neighbors even came by to apologize personally. I accepted. They had been manipulated by a master, and I held no grudges. The peace I had moved here to find finally began to settle over the land. I often think about the whole ordeal when I'm up in the Cessna, looking down at the world from a few thousand feet. It strikes me that Brenda's entire philosophy was based on a ground-level view. She was obsessed with control, with lines on a map, with forcing everything to fit her narrow, beige vision of the world. She never understood that some things, like the sky, can't be fenced in. My father built that airstrip as his own little slice of freedom. In the end, I had to fight a war to preserve it. I didn't want to be a warrior, I wanted to be a quiet son honoring his father's memory. But I learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the only way to achieve peace is through overwhelming force. Not with violence, but with truth, meticulously engineered and strategically deployed. I stood up to a bully, not just for myself, but for the principle of the thing. What would you have done? It's a question I ask myself sometimes. Would you have sold up and moved on, or would you have dug in for the fight? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. Now, the only sound I hear is the wind in the trees and the gentle hum of the Cessna's engine as I prepare for another flight. The beige houses of Whispering Pines are quiet neighbors. The airstrip, my father's legacy, is safe. It lies there, a green ribbon on the landscape, a testament to a battle fought and won, ready for my next takeoff, or for any soul in the sky who might one day need a safe place to land. And if you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe, because I've learned that in a world full of Brendas, sometimes the best stories come from fighting back.